Hey everybody, this is Hale here. I've been asked to make a film on ancient India to reveal some of the lost knowledge of this era. The information I'm sharing has been given to me from telepathic conversations with Krishna, Lakshmi and Arjuna, among others. They have asked me to share some of the things we have discussed over many conversations. They want the world to know some of these truths at last. Many of the incredible things I will be sharing are a completely and radically different perspective on the ancient stories. So if you're a religious Hindu purist, proceed with fair warning. If you're willing to be open-minded, then come take a journey with me into the true history of ancient India.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
First of all, let's tackle the elephant in the room. According to Krishna, when he walked the earth in that form, his name was not Krishna. It was Christ. Na was a sign of respect. Krishna and Jesus Christ were the same person, in different avatars. So in truth it is also Jesus, or Yeshua, which is one of the names he prefers, who has been sharing much of this information with me.
My lord, Vivasavana was born before thee. How canst thou have revealed it to him?
I have been born again and again, from time to time. Thou too, O Arjuna. My births are known to me, but thou knowest not thine. I have no beginning, though I am imperishable as well as Lord of all that exists, yet by my own will and power do I manifest myself. Whenever spirituality decays and materialism is rampant, then, O Arjuna, I reincarnate myself to protect the righteous, to destroy the wicked, and to establish the kingdom of God. I am reborn from age to age.
As Christ suggested, using pure logic. If you believe that he said these words, then it should not be a big stretch to believe that Krishna and Christ were the same person. So whether you're singing Hare Krishna or singing to Jesus Christ, you are singing to the same person. According to Swami Prabhupada, who has written the most famous translation of the Bhagavad Gita, and who began the Hare Krishna movement. Christ comes from the Greek word Christos, meaning the Anointed One. Christos is the Greek version of the word Krishna. Swami Prabhupada knew that Jesus Christ and Krishna were the same person. So who is Lakshmi? In that lifetime, her name was Rukmini, and she married Christ in a temple at Madhavpur, Ged. It is said that Lakshmi is the eternal partner of Vishnu, who appears at his side lifetime after lifetime. According to Christ and Lakshmi, Lakshmi is Christ's twin flame, which means they are two souls which come from the same source. In the time of Jesus Christ, she was known as Mary Magdalene. They have incarnated together and married lifetime after lifetime. They have incarnated in all 4 Yugas. They were also Rama and Sita of the epic Ramayana. The Bhagavad Gita, the most famous of the chapters in the Mahabharata. It is about a conversation between two people, Krishna and Arjuna, as they stand upon the brink of the Dharma Yuddha, the righteous war. The text of these chapters of the Bhagavad Gita cover a large range of spiritual topics. It turns out that Arjuna is another famous figure from our history. In a future incarnation, he was known as Gautama Buddha. It was Buddha himself who told me this. As part of the writing of this film, he came to speak to me as well. We spoke together about his lifetime of Arjuna. You may notice a great similarity between what Arjuna learned in the Bhagavad Gita and in Buddhist philosophy. Buddha says, this lifetime of Arjuna was a part of his journey in the development of Buddhist philosophy. He used many things he learned as Arjuna in his teachings. During his lifetime of Arjuna, he was a disciple of Krishna. For those of you who are skeptical that I can actually talk to these wise and ancient souls, Krishna wants me to remind you that all of you can speak to them. Many of you do already. When you are ready, you might just hear them speak back. And to settle a long-standing confusion, Krishna wasn't blue-skinned. They were in human bodies and looked like regular humans. I was also told that Buddha was not an avatar of Vishnu. Krishna told me that only aspects of Christ Krishna and Lakshmi Mary Magdalene are avatars of Vishnu. It is prophesied that the final avatar of Vishnu, Kalki, will incarnate into a human body at the end of days. Our planet has seen two polar shifts in recent history, which destroyed most of the past civilizations on this planet, except for those monuments which remain from earlier times. The first polar shift destroyed the civilization of Mu about 13,000 years ago. Mu was a younger version of Lemuria, which was also destroyed in a polar shift. The other recent polar shift destroyed Atlantis over 7,500 years ago. This is spoken of in the story of the Great Flood in the Old Testament. After the polar shift that destroyed Atlantis, ancient India was born, around the same time as ancient Egypt. The pyramids of ancient Egypt are actually about 7,500 years old. So that is an approximation of when these civilizations first began to flourish. India at that time was an offshoot of the Lemurian civilization. There were many Lemurian souls there, including myself, which influenced the culture and brought the wisdom of that ancient age into the new world, reborn from the ashes of the old. There were Atlantean souls there as well, and many starseeds from many different civilizations also walked at that time. Egypt was an offshoot of Atlantis. The pyramids were built with Atlantean crystal technology. This was technology that had once existed on Atlantis. This is why nobody today can figure out how they were built by hand with such precision. They also say the Hope Diamond is the last of the known Atlantean song crystals, which once belonged to the Atlantean high priest. It is damaged and has discordant energy, which is why it is believed to be cursed. The ancient Egyptian civilization flourished around the same time as ancient India began to flourish. Twin civilizations, just as before the pole shifts, born from the ashes. In the time of ancient India, there was much Lemurian technology available, as well as technology from the Star Nations, given to us to fight this war. The other side had technology too, weapons of great destruction, which they also used to fight. Arjuna is said to have received many weapons of strange and magical design. The Great War, which is known in history as the Kurukshetra, was not only a war between greedy brothers, as was shared in the Mahabharata. It was literally a war between good and evil. It involved many non-humans, what we would today call extraterrestrials. Although many of these beings have been here longer than we have. Many know the legends of the demons who fought on the side of the Kauravas. But they weren't actually demons. They were different types of extraterrestrial creatures. Krishna says that it was a holy war, which is why he came to the earth as a warrior in that incarnation. The lower lords had controlled a large part of Atlantis for centuries, and they were still here long after Atlantis fell. They were a great problem. The lower lords corrupted the hearts of the Kauravas and gave them powerful weapons with which to fight the forces of light. The lower lords played a great part in the war against the Pandavas, and the purpose of this war was to remove them from power. When we refer to the lower lords, these are a number of different races of dark and destructive extraterrestrials who were on the earth in great numbers at that time, seeking dominion over the entire earth. Legends of these negative beings are found in the mythology of many of the ancient peoples on earth. I believe the Pisachas, as spoken of in the ancient Indian legends, are descriptions of them. The time for the Kali Yuga had come, but the Dark Ones had to be dealt with first. So Christ came to earth to lead the divine forces, to drive away the darkness, so that the youngest could be born and live in peace. Arjuna's brothers and family all had a choice between the light and the dark side. The ones who walked with Christ walked in the light. Other brothers fell in with the dark side, and eventually came under the control of these negative extraterrestrials. After many years, many victories were won by the light, and much of the dark forces were cleansed from the earth. The Holy War was considered a success. Even though the Dark Ones did not disappear entirely, they were weakened enough to allow the youngest souls of the Kali Yuga a chance to grow without being immediately enslaved. Many of the different beings who had fought alongside the lower lords were banished from Earth and sent off planet. There were non-humans fighting on both sides, the light and the dark. Many different beings walked side by side in those days. The wide variety of stories of different deities and demons in the Hindu religion supports this theory. One example of those who fought alongside the forces of the light is the Sasquatch. They stepped forward to assist the work of Christ and the light, and had a close connection with some of the humans who fought against the dark forces. They were also fulfilling their role as the guardians of humanity. The Sasquatch are today remembered in ancient India in stories of Hanuman and the monkey people. But they were not monkeys. They were Sasquatch. Who are these different races that fought on the dark side, and what is their story? We will not be discussing most of them in this video, or the races of the lower lords. However, two of these different races have come forward to share their stories. They want the truth to be known. Representatives from these races visited while I was receiving the messages for this film and told me their stories telepathically. One of them is a large, hairy creature, approximately 7 feet in height, which resembles a huge otter or weasel. They were the creators of the animal we know as weasel. This might require a bit of explanation.
Every single creature on this earth has a distant ancestor who is a fully evolved sentient being. When the earth was being created, which was done with the cooperation of many different races of beings, many different beings from across the universe were included in animal form. This was to be a way for us to be connected to this earth, so that we would share a telepathic link to the events of this earth. All of these beings have been watching this Earth planet through the various animal forms that populate it, which are representations of our species.
These beings lived in Lemuria, along with a vast number of different extraterrestrial beings. Lemuria was truly a melting pot of thousands of different races of the star nations. There were extraterrestrials in Atlantis too, although not as many varieties. There was peace between this group and humans, and they walked in the light. But after Lemuria fell, they were forced to go to Atlantis, where they, along with many different races, fell under the dominion of the lower lords, who controlled large parts of Atlantis at that time. Their people remained under the control of the lower lords, mind-controlled, after Atlantis fell. They fought in the wars against the forces of Arjuna and Krishna, and they were large and ferocious in battle. From what I have heard, ancient Hindu scripture remembers them as the Rakshasas, who are depicted in the Mahabharata as fierce, man-eating creatures, very large and strong, with large fangs. They were taken off planet after that war and kept away. Since that time, they have returned to the light. The other group that I was told about were the butterfly people. At first I was very surprised and a bit skeptical. They are very interesting looking creatures that look like a cross between a butterfly and a human, with large wings standing about 8 feet tall. They move with much grace and are very beautiful. They have insect-like hands. I could not imagine them fighting in a war, especially on the dark side. They said that they were under the dominion of the Dark Lords against their will. They were being mind-controlled to the point where they were not able to choose anything for themselves. They had no choice but to fight at the Dark One's bidding. They fought on the battlefields using weapons of energy and frequency. They did not fight in conventional ways, more like as wizards. That kind of mind control was much used during the last few centuries of Atlantis and in the times that followed. They want us all to know that that kind of mind control still exists today, and it is still being used today on humanity. After the end of that war, they were also removed from the earth. They immediately returned to the light, as the dark side is against their very nature. The butterflies they gifted us still remain. For those who have not read it, the Mahabharata is a record of the great war that took place in ancient India, and the stories of different people on both sides of the war. until I began working on this film, I knew absolutely nothing about the Mahabharata or the Bhagavad Gita. In fact, I knew very little about Hinduism. You might be asking why they chose me to share this information, rather than some historian or Hindu rishi who is an expert in the subject. Besides the fact that I have the ability to communicate with telepathy, Krishna and Lakshmi also told me that I had a past life in ancient India when the events of the Mahabharata were taking place. I participated in the events of the Great War, working with the forces of the light, headed by Arjuna and Krishna, although I did not directly fight on the battlefield. Therefore, I am able to feel the truth of these events on a soul level, because I experienced them directly. For those of you who are skeptical of reincarnation, think about this. If Krishna can incarnate in different bodies, lifetime after lifetime, then we can too. We just don't remember our past lives the way he does.
I have been born again and again from time to time. Thou too, O Arjuna. My births are known to me, but thou knowest not thine.
We lead many different lifetimes. You have all had many lifetimes. When you incarnate into your current form on Earth, you forget about the other lifetimes you've had, so you can focus on the one you're living. And then, Chris told me that I was one of the authors of the Mahabharata. After I got over the shock and total amazement of hearing these words, I asked how that was possible. This is what I learned. The Mahabharata was a collection of stories written by many different people who were there at that time. We were encouraged to write down our stories about the events that took place at this time in history. Many different people shared stories from different perspectives, which is why the book has been described as unstructured and chaotic, and why it is so long. Krishna played a role in guiding all the different authors of the Mahabharata. He said that he personally met with all the different authors of this great epic, and invited us to share stories of our experiences in that time, for later inclusion in a book. These stories were eventually collected by the various star nations on Earth, who stored them safely for a future publication. When the world was ready, and the writing and creation of books was starting to reach a more advanced level, these stories were given to the physical authors of the Mahabharata, who translated them into Sanskrit. I was told that this book was professionally done, meaning they made sure that the information they shared was translated as accurately as possible and without corruption by the highest souls, wise and ancient starseeds. It was these translators who put the book into poem form. This was one of their great contributions. The original stories were all narratives. I was also told that the original text was given to the transcribers through downloads of the stories directly into their minds. After the download, the translators were able to record these stories into Sanskrit. To many of you, The idea of downloading a book into your head might sound impossible, like something out of the Matrix. But it is done quite often, sometimes without people even knowing it. As long as the translator has the ability to receive and process this information, it can be done. I know a few people who have had entire books downloaded into their minds. One example being the Sasquatch Message to Humanity series by Sunbow, in which Sasquatch Elder Camus downloaded 2 books of Sasquatch knowledge into Sunbow's mind. The downloads are a way to offer a complete story to a highly evolved soul, who can then bring it forth from their unconscious while they are writing. It is a form of automatic writing. Many great books have been written this way. Many of the great books of this civilization have been written this way. It is not as impossible as it sounds to get a completely accurate story, told exactly as the original authors wrote it. Christ considers the translation of the Mahabharata that was created by these sages to be extremely accurate, almost to the word of the original texts, which he has read. Although his name is listed as the author, Vyasa didn't write nor transcribe the Mahabharata or any other books. Ganesha did not transcribe it either. The actual transcribers did not put their names on them. According to Christ, the idea that Vyasa did write it was a misunderstanding, because the name Vyasa means arranger or compiler. Therefore, those who received these books and made copies for the world assumed he was the author. But he was only a person who was alive in the time of the Mahabharata and participated in the events of that time in history. The transcribers of the Mahabharata were tasked only with the work of creating the original text. After their work was completed, which took 14 years, then the books were given to a wealthy Brahmin, who made copies of the books and began to circulate them. After their work was completed, the transcribers had nothing more to do with the books. The stories of the Ramayana were downloaded with the same process as the Mahabharata, except this time they were sharing far older stories of ancient Lemuria, when Christ had incarnated as Rama, and his twin flame Lakshmi was Sita. I've also been told that not everything I wrote down was used, including some of the most interesting stories. The story of the war between the brothers is only a part of the total story. Those who had collected the stories chose which parts they wanted us to focus on, saving the rest for later. Many things that would have given a more complete picture of what had taken place were left out on purpose. Not only is the Mahabharata an edited version of the story, in fact, it's only half of the total stories that were collected. The total length of the complete book is actually twice as long as what we were given. Why would they give us only half the book? This version of the book that we received was left as a clue to unravel the past, and also as a teaching tool. For the part of the Kali Yuga was for humanity not to have a record of the events of the past, but to walk through the world blind in order to find new perspectives. One example is the infamous dice game, where Yudhishthira bets his entire kingdom against the Kauravas in a game of dice. This important scene is what sets off the great Kurukshetra war. I began listening to an audiobook of the Mahabharata while working on this film. When I got to the events of the dice game, I began to get very emotional and upset. When Draupadi was dragged before the elders, I felt it viscerally, and I suddenly had a powerful vision of how she looked, standing there in that great hall. Then I received a message from Krishna that I was there at that dice game and witnessed those events. That resonates with me strongly. The other thing I felt strongly while listening is that the story of the dice game in the book doesn't make sense. I was sure there must have been more to the story. I asked Krishna about it, and he told me that a good deal of that story was left out. Although the dice game did take place, there was a lot more going on there that day, relating to the Holy War. The name of Krishna was altered too. They took the name Krishna, Na being an honorary title added to the end of his name, and changed it to Krishna. They did it so we would have to work to figure it out. They left all the clues for the truth to be discovered, but they wanted us to figure it out for ourselves. The Celestials, as they are described in the Mahabharata, refer to extraterrestrials of many races. The authors of this book were instructed not to mention anything about extraterrestrials, as part of the rules of the Kali Yuga. We were told to use words like celestial instead. Spaceships became celestial chariots. Celestial weapons were advanced weapons of extraterrestrial origin, or sometimes of Lemurian origin. The different writers were also given the opportunity to meet up and discuss the book in order to create a more cohesive narrative. Also, I have had confirmation that all the authors had the freedom to write the stories as they wanted to, and some chose to use parables and metaphors. So not everything in this book is to be taken literally. The strength of Bhima, for example, is greatly exaggerated. Although he was a great warrior, he was a regular man and was not invincible. He did not have superhuman strength. I have heard that we can expect a full edition of the Mahabharata sometime in the future, featuring all of the stories that were left out of the first book. This new version will be a collection of all the original stories as they were written down, and will not be in poem form. I do not know which part of the book I personally wrote, except that it was not the Bhagavad Gita. As for those chapters, the story of how they were written is very interesting. Buddha told me that he and Krishna had been having versions of the conversation that takes place in the Bhagavad Gita for months. Krishna was there to inspire a holy war, to take out the dark forces inhabiting the earth at that time. He wanted Arjuna to be the general of the forces of the light. Arjuna did not want to fight in a war, especially against his brothers. I was told that nobody on the light side wanted to fight. After months of conversations like these, eventually Arjuna was convinced to be a general for the holy forces. They raised an army to fight the lower lords. Later, he and Krishna decided to record the conversations they had been having as a teaching tool for everyone to read someday. They scripted it out and did a performance of these conversations for Sanjaya, who copied it down at the request of Krishna. They made it theatrical in order for it to be entertaining, which is why they speak like this at times.
How, O Madhusudana, shall I fight in battle with arrows against Bhishma and Drona, who are fit to be worshipped, O destroyer of enemies?
Yield not to impotence, O Arjuna, son of Pritha. It does not befit thee. Cast off this mean weakness of the heart. Stand up, O scorcher of foes.
They did not normally speak like that. That's why the Bhagavad Gita stands out as being so tight and perfect in a collection of stories that many have described as chaotic and unstructured. Because it was carefully scripted by Krishna and Arjuna. I was told that Hinduism in that time was much different than Hinduism today, and the current religion bears little resemblance to the original version of Hinduism. Here's an example given to me by Krishna of one of Krishna's teachings in that time.
The earth is sacred. She is the mother of all things. She is to be loved and respected.
Of the gods and goddesses of the Hindu belief system, Krishna says that some of those whom you know as divine beings were just humans of great honor and respect. Others were higher beings who were closer to the divine source. You will have to figure out which ones were which for yourselves. I have since received some visions of my life in that time. I have long buried memories of advanced technology and weaponry being used in ancient India. I remember seeing Sasquatch and extraterrestrials of various types walking around. One of the most incredible visions I saw was of me standing upon a mountaintop. A few Sasquatch suddenly appeared from out of the forest. I stared at a very large Sasquatch for several minutes, and he looked back at me. I learned later that this Sasquatch I saw in ancient India is my current Sasquatch guide today. He is old now, well over 5,000 years old, being of the line of ancient ones. He was very young then. He told me that this moment is a constant source of amazement to him, as neither of us knew at the time that he was going to be my guide so far in the future. But as they say, there are no coincidences. I saw myself riding an elephant as one of my means of transportation. In those days, I felt elephants were treated with much honor among us. The being we know as Ganesha was helping with the war effort by providing elephants for transportation and to fight battles. Ganesha was an extraterrestrial. His race were the ones who created and seeded elephants on this earth. The reason that we were riding horses and elephants is because, after the fall of Atlantis, it was decided that spaceships would no longer be permitted to be seen upon the earth. A great defensive grid of the Star Nation's spacecraft encircled the earth and did not allow any spaceships to land, with the exception of the Star Nations itself, who all came to the earth in their ships cloaked, so they would not be visible to the surface population. This was in preparation for the Kali Yuga, when spacecraft would no longer be allowed to be visible, which was a requirement for the entire length of that age. Krishna was born in India around 3400 BC. All of the events of Mahabharata took place in that time. When Krishna and Lakshmi left their bodies and entered the kingdom of Vaikuntha, then the Kali Yuga began, and the Dwapara Yuga ended. So what does that mean? It was explained to me the true meaning of the Yugas. According to traditional knowledge of the Yugas, one cycle contains 4 ages: the Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. As the Yugas progress, the morality and purity of the age decreases by 1/4. Dharma is personified as a bull, whose 4 legs reduce by 1 with each new yuga. If you have watched the video on this channel called Earth Seeds, then you know that there are 4 soul groups of Earth Seeds born on this planet that are part of the Great Earth Experiment. The Yugas actually refer to the 4 Earthborn soul groups and the eras in which they walked the earth. If you want to know more about the Great Earth Experiment, watch Oracles of the Ascension, also on this channel. The Satya Yuga, the purest form of the earthly soul, refers to the Sasquatch soul group. The Satya Yuga began during the time of the dinosaurs, when the Sasquatch first walked the earth. Anyone who has encountered and communicated with a Sasquatch will understand this quite well. Their vibration is one of pure love. They are the eldest, with the highest inabilities of the earthborn, and the purest form of the 4 earth seeds. Christ says that the overall purpose of the Sasquatch soul was to create a perfect soul, a soul that is totally pure. The Sasquatch soul is the mastery of the Great Earth Experiment. The Treta Yuga is the time when it is said that morality walks on 3 legs. This was the time of Lemuria. This was also the beginning of the human race. The original human soul group was the Lemurians, which was less evolved and had less abilities than the Sasquatch soul. Although it was created with the pattern of the Sasquatch soul as a blueprint. The Sasquatch and Lemurian soul groups are primarily heart-centered. Lemuria existed for approximately 6 million years. The Dvapara Yuga began with the birth of the Atlantean soul, which was well over 1,000,000 years ago. This is the time when morality walks on two legs. The Atlantean soul was the creation of a new soul blueprint on Earth. It was more mind-centered than the Lemurian soul, and less heart-centered, and it had less natural abilities. The Kali Yuga was when morality stood upon one leg. As soon as the Kali Yuga began, the youngest of the earth seeds began to be born. The Atlantean soul was the blueprint for this current generation of human souls. Although the Kali Yuga soul group was less evolved than the Atlanteans, and did not have the same abilities as the Atlantean soul group, or the ones before it. Compassion was the baseline of this Earth experiment. The Earth experiment is about a slow de-evolution of the soul's abilities, accompanied by a slow de-evolution of morality, but with compassion remaining in full strength. This youngest group are the most numerous of the Earth soul groups right now. Christ says that honor is a part of the soul contract. It is meant to bring forth love from the heart. The Sasquatch are born with the highest vibration of honor among the four soul groups. The youngest of the Kali Yuga are born with the lowest vibration of honor. This will be their great challenge when they enter the Golden Age. Most of these earth seeds from the Kali Yuga have grown up without any knowledge of any of the technology and magic of Atlantis and Lemuria. This was done on purpose. The great technology of the past was hidden, so these youngest Earth souls would have to start over from scratch and find their own way to ascension. And they succeeded. The Kali Yuga is now over. We are now entering the Golden Age. I've been told that this group will be rising the fastest eventually. They will be supercharged in the future. The point is not that they will always be unevolved and behind, but will eventually catch up with the others, with an entirely new perspective. The four Earth soul groups are now coming together at last, now that the Kali Yuga has ended. They will all be working together to help each other rise. Christ says that the reason that the Kali Yuga was conceived was in order to help the universe evolve. To evolve past pointless wars and great sorrows, to move to a higher dimension. It was necessary for the universe to clear out the endless darkness that has mercilessly traumatized it for eons, beyond what you can conceive of. That was the purpose of the Kali Yuga. I asked Lakshmi about the time frames given in Hindu history. For example, the Kali Yuga is supposed to last over 400,000 years, according to Puranic sources. She laughed and said, "No thanks, we've had enough." She also mentioned that we got an early ascension. For many of you listening to this information may sound absolutely crazy. I asked Chris about this, wondering if some of it sounded too crazy for people to believe. And he said that the version that many Hindus believe is crazy. These are the true stories, and it's time for people to hear the truth. Chris has a message for the Hindus listening to this film.
Be not concerned with who is sharing these messages. Be only concerned with what the lessons are you've learned from these stories. And never forget that we love you.
Namaste.